but every system in your body runs off of a genetic code that has approximately 4 basic digits in it in such a blinding array of organization. It's astonishing. And not only that, but the way it works is that scientists believe that up until a certain point there's something called junk DNA inside of your DNA. This is the DNA that doesn't replicate, it doesn't transcribe to the messenger RNA that makes all the proteins in your body. There's part of that DNA that doesn't actually replicate. The Spirit of God spoke to me one day. He was basically telling me, Yusef, isn't it amazing what they're calling that junk DNA? That's actually the DNA that I turned off in Adam. And I never thought about it like that before. I was in prayer. Yeah, I was really thinking about it. I was like, that's amazing that would actually be there. And they found something in there that does not replicate no matter what happens. Also inside of your DNA, you actually have in every single cell the DNA for every single part of your body. But some of it is turned off and some of it is turned on like a light switch. That's why you don't have, liver cells growing out of your hair, or you don't have, finger cells or fingernails growing out of your eyes.
Right.
If you took any cell, if you took a skin cell and pulled the genetic information out of there, the entire genetic code for your entire body and being is inside of that one cell.
Wow.
And that's the case with all of your cells, but God designed it so awesomely that it only turns on and turns off right where you need it. That's how they actually did the clone the sheep dolly. Yeah. What they did is they took a mammary gland cell from an adult sheep, and it had the entire components for another whole sheep in it, and so they just kind of manipulated it and turned all the right things on by combining it with an egg cell and produced another sheep out of a mammary gland cell.
Wow.
So it's the same thing with humans. But just kind of getting back to what you were saying, yes, quantum mechanics and all that basically goes into this thing whereby they realize that the observer determines the measurement. It's not just a standard measurement, but depending on how you're observing and how you're determining where light is and where it's coming from and all that, that actually determines what speed it is.
Yes.
All right. The fancy term for it was coined by a guy named Wheeler. It's called participatory anthropic principle. That's a fancy term that says, one, that the universe came into existence by virtue of an intelligent observer, and two, if you go with that line of thought, along with Walter Heisenberg, he was basically stating that what we're finding out is that the form of a system determines, the function of a system determines its form. It's not so much that the atomic particles and the speed of light is setting the stage. No, how we view it sets the stage for what it is. That's where these guys are going with it. Wow. But, of course, once again, no Christian should be shocked by that because we know an intelligent observer named God, Jesus Christ, actually spoke all things into existence. And we're going to go into that in just a few moments with the frequencies. So, yes, oh, yes. There are all kinds of astonishing things that these guys are beginning to discover, and I believe it's because the Spirit of God is releasing revelation knowledge whereby they're saying, hey, we thought these guys were kind of off the rocker back at the turn of the century, but we're starting to realize they were actually right. Sanyak was right. There is an ether out there. And when you start getting into some of the research that's very, very recent, like within the past 10 or 20 years or so, and of course in science language that's very recent, then you start finding some astonishing things whereby they're tapping into that ether. One of the most notable things is by a couple of guys by the name of Vladimir Krasnoholovets and Michael Bunias. These guys were doing some research in Russia and into Ukraine with pyramids. And this is in Pharaoh's books in the Giza Death Star trilogy, where he talks about this. In particular, I believe it's in Giza Death Star Deployed, where he goes into a lot of detail about it. But these guys, what they did is they set up these gigantic fiberglass pyramids out in the fields in Russia. Some of them as big, if I'm not mistaken, as tall as about 144 feet tall. And they put all kinds of various substances in there, and they found some amazing results. For example, and this is just the pyramid. They're not really doing anything to the pyramids. They just stuck these objects and devices in the pyramids and just to see what type of results they would get out of it, and they found some incredible things. Depending on the angle and this sort of thing of the pyramid and how it's shaped and what have you, they found, for example, that when they have water inside of one of these larger pyramids at minus 38 degrees centigrade, the water does not freeze.
Huh.
But, however, if you take the water and agitate it, if you jiggle it a little bit, it'll instantly begin to congeal and freeze right on the spot. Or like, for example, how they took mice injected with a certain immunoglobulin and some viruses, and they found out that the mice that were sitting in the pyramid actually got better, whereas the control mice that were not died. Not only that, they put some plant seeds inside of these pyramids, and they found out that there was a 20 to 100% difference in terms of the crop yield of the seeds that have been inside of the pyramids. Even on top of that, they found that the actual strength of concrete was altered. They found that the radioactive isotopes and certain radioactive materials was altered. They even found some more unusual results. For example, it was recorded by Pharaoh that these guys actually found out that when they constructed these pyramids, there was a certain area where they constructed the pyramids, and for some reason that they could not explain, the seismic activity in that area dropped tremendously. It dropped dramatically. There were fewer earthquakes in that area as a result of the pyramid being there. Also, they found out that not only that, but there were certain species of plants that had been extinct, certain flowers that had been extinct, and botanists were astonished to find that in and around that pyramid structure, the plants began to grow again. Krasnoholovitz and Bunius explained that the reason why these results occurred was because of the ether substance that we were just talking about. They believed that these pyramids were somehow tuning in and amplifying the energy that's inside of the ether substance itself, that's holding all things together, that's responsible for all things. And they do this blinding array of very powerful mathematical proofs to try to explain it through a system developed by a French mathematician, Poincaré, called topological mathematics, whereby they explain that by the ether, all things came into being, that the ether actually in some way produced all objects that we now have in space and time. And that what was happening with these pyramid structures is that they were manipulating space and time and coming up with, and I don't think it's a stretch to make this statement, but coming up with miraculous results, quote unquote.
Wow.
Because of the ether substance itself.
Wow.
So, as you can see, there's a lot going on out there. And lo and behold, if it wasn't for a guy named Dr. DeSalvo, we probably wouldn't even know about these amazing findings in some of this Russian literature that they're actually finding about this ether substance. But, how is this possible? Well, if we think about it logically, if we think about from the ether substance, like the ancients believed, it was not only wave carrying, but it was wave creating, all things actually came out of that ether, then there should be what Krasnoholovitz and Bunius called a system history or a set history going back to the ether. In other words, if everything came out of the ether, then that means everything is basically ether in and of itself, right? It's pretty simple logic. Or like we know in modern logic, where they talk about the principle of first cause, that if all causes are basically effects of a prior cause, right, just by looking at it logically, then if you reverse that language all the way back, you can go back to the fact that there had to be one cause that caused all effects, or all causes, and that's called the first cause. And the question is, well, what caused the first cause? Nothing is the first cause. The law of identity and logic makes it clear that by virtue of fact that it's the first cause, nothing caused it. That's why when an atheist asks you, sometimes they'll kind of stump Christians with the question, well, okay, if God created all things, who created God? The answer that Grant Jeffrey gives by the law of first cause is nobody created God. God has always existed in eternity at all times, okay, as far as we would understand time. But he existed in eternity, and nobody created him. He is the sole creator. He's always existed. Right. So by the law of first cause, we know that. Well, in the same way, if we take the scientific language of the ether, since all things came out of the ether, then therefore all things are affected by the ether, just like the first cause affects all things. The ether affects all things. And lo and behold, when these guys did these empirical experiments, they found that very result, and they explained it in their peer-reviewed papers as being the results of this ether. And they not only do that, but they use this topological mathematics to explain that the reason why the pyramids work that way is because the pyramids are basically harmonizing or tapping into the power of the structure of the ether itself, just by how they're shaped and how they're made.
Well, is that why